I always thought family was supposed to be your refuge when the world turned its back on you. I thought love was unconditional. That no matter how messy I got, someone would sit with me in the dirt until I found my feet again. But maybe I was just naive. Or maybe I was too easy to throw away. My name is Calla Whitlock. Not the most glamorous name for someone who, as of last quarter, sat comfortably on a net worth my family still pretends doesn't exist. They like to tell the story differently, the version where I was the rebellious disappointment, the girl with no direction, no ambition, no future. They left out the part where they never asked what I was building, while they mocked me for not clocking into a 9 to 5 like my older brother, Nathaniel, the golden boy. The day they kicked me out wasn't loud. It was humiliating, though. I can still taste the bile in the back of my throat when I think about it. It was early spring, the last frost still melting off the lawn, the scent of wet earth soaking through my sneakers as I trudged down the driveway with 2 suitcases. Mom leaned on the doorframe, arms folded tight across her chest like she had to hold her ribs together to keep her lungs from collapsing. Dad stood behind her, jaw clenched so hard I heard his teeth crack when he told me I'd brought this on myself. I didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't cry. I just stood there on the curb with my phone at 12% and no idea where I'd sleep that night. They didn't even give me a ride to the bus station. Nathaniel was inside, his shadow flickering behind the curtains like he was afraid I'd curse him if he looked me in the eye. Back then, my startup was just a late-night obsession. A digital design consultancy I ran from the attic of a friend's basement flat. No one knew it was quietly picking up international clients while I pretended to be job hunting at Mom's insistence. I lied because the truth was too fragile, too small, too easy for them to crush under the weight of their disappointment. So I found a cheap hostel, spent a few nights smelling mold and cold sweat while I learned to listen to the dark and remind myself I was free now. Free to fail or to fly, and no one would get to say I hadn't tried. Years went by like that, scraping by, reinvesting every dime I made. Sleeping on floors, eating cheap instant noodles, pitching to people who thought I was a broke 20-something with a hobby. And then something cracked open. A viral campaign for a mid-sized brand that caught a big name's attention. Suddenly, I was on flights to Berlin, Amsterdam, New York, sitting at the table with people who only cared about the work, not my past. I still didn't tell them. My family, I mean. When they asked how I was doing, I kept it small. Good, busy, you know how it is. They didn't really care. Not until last month. It was Nathaniel's engagement party. The first time in years, I'd walked back into their house, my boots leaving muddy prints on the polished marble Mom bragged about on Facebook. I almost turned around and left when I saw the way Dad's eyes flicked from my battered coat to Nathaniel's fiancée's diamond ring. Sabrina, that's her name, was warm. Too warm, maybe. She squeezed my hand like we were sisters already, whispering how excited she was to finally meet the elusive Calla. I wanted to shrink right there, under her champagne perfume. I wanted to disappear before she asked what I did for a living. She didn't. Not right away. Not until the second glass of Prosecco, when Nathaniel had wandered off to brag about their honeymoon plans. I caught her standing by the hallway mirror, scrolling her phone, frowning. "Calla, is it true you're in tech?" she asked, one brow raised. I froze. My fingers tangled in the napkin I'd been shredding for the past half hour. Sort of. Consulting, mostly. She nodded slowly. Her phone hovered over the search bar like she was checking a rumor she wasn't sure she should believe. "I Googled you," she said finally, her voice so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Is this real?" She held out her phone. My heart slammed into my ribs. There it was. An interview I'd done for a design magazine, a puff piece with a clickbait headline. From homeless to CEO, how Calla Whitlock built a multi-million-dollar firm before 30. I wanted to deny it. Laugh it off, but something inside me hardened. For the first time in years, I let the truth breathe. "Yes," I said, "it's real." Her eyes widened. I watched the gears turning behind them. I could almost see it. The numbers stacking up, the weight of my existence shifting from worthless to whatever they'd decide now. And then Nathaniel reappeared, draping his arm around her waist like a trophy. "Everything okay, babe?" She glanced at him, then back at me. I knew in that second she'd tell him. Tell them all. The secret they thought they could bury with me when they kicked me out. My chest buzzed with something between terror and triumph. For the first time in my life they would see me. Not the black sheep, not the burden. Me. But I should have known better than to believe it would be that simple. Because the moment Sabrina put her phone away, she leaned in, her voice dripping with something I couldn't place. You should come over for dinner next week. Just you and us. We have so much to talk about. I should have run. I should have known an invitation from my family was never just dinner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. I didn't sleep the night after Sabrina's whisper. I lay awake in the rented flat I now called home, a neat, minimalist apartment in a city my parents pretended didn't exist on the map. London had become my fortress, my cathedral of independence, but as the dawn cracked through the blinds, it felt like a prison again. I kept replaying her words. We have so much to talk about. It was Nathaniel who texted first. Not a question, not a greeting. Just an address, a time, and a thumbs-up emoji that made me want to hurl my phone into the Thames. The train ride back was endless. Every station blurred into the next, a long stretch of concrete and faceless commuters who couldn't hear my pulse pounding like a war drum. I found myself staring at my reflection in the train window, the expensive wool coat that looked too sharp for a girl they once called worthless, the designer boots I'd bought on a whim in Paris after signing my first big contract. I wondered if I looked like money now, if they'd see me as a walking ATM. When I stepped off the platform, the air smelled like damp brick and blooming roses. Suburban perfection. A far cry from the glass towers and noise I'd wrapped myself in. Their house hadn't changed. The same crisp hedges, the same brass knocker, the same chipped stone path I'd tiptoed over as a kid to avoid Dad's lectures about dirty shoes. Mom answered the door before I even knocked. Her eyes darted past my shoulder, like she was making sure no paparazzi trailed behind me. You came, she said, voice tight, lips stretched into something like a smile. Come in. Take off your boots, will you? They track mud. I wanted to laugh. Your daughter's name is trending on LinkedIn. But let's worry about the mud. Inside, everything smelled like roast beef and forced civility. Nathaniel was perched on the edge of Dad's favorite chair, Sabrina curled next to him, legs crossed so precisely it looked rehearsed. Dad stood behind them, arms folded. An audience for my performance. Mom ushered me to the couch. I sank into it, my spine too stiff, my heartbeat rattling like a penny in a tin can. No one spoke for a moment, the silence punctuated by the tick of the grandfather clock. The same clock they'd refused to pawn when the mortgage payments got tight, back when they told me I was too much of a burden to keep. Finally, Sabrina cleared her throat. We just wanted to understand, she began, her tone sweet as a spoonful of poison. How did you do it? All these millions. Where did it come from? I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. Clients, work, good decisions. Dad's jaw twitched. Don't be flippant. You owe us honesty at least. I owe you nothing. The words curled on my tongue, sharp and delicious. But I swallowed them. Instead, I explained the basics. The digital strategy, the early contracts, the gamble that paid off when no one else would back me. Nathaniel's eyes darted to Sabrina's every few seconds, like he was checking whether she approved of my answers. When I finished, they sat in silence again. I half expected applause. Instead, Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes drilling into mine. And you never thought to share? I scoffed. You kicked me out. Remember? Mom flinched. Sabrina placed a delicate hand on her thigh, like she needed to steady the ship. We were worried, Sabrina said, her voice dripping pity. You know, when we heard rumors that you might be getting too big for one person, it's a lot of pressure, so much money to manage alone. There it was, the pitch, disguised as concern. Nathaniel cleared his throat. What Sabrina means is, we're family. Maybe we could help. You know, invest, manage things properly. I stared at him, heat rushing to my face. I wanted to laugh. An ugly, barking laugh that would echo off their perfect walls. Manage path. Or my bank account. He bristled. Don't be dramatic, Kala. Dramatic? I repeated. You haven't texted me in 3 years, Nate. You didn't come to my flat when I was sleeping on a moldy mattress. You didn't even offer me a bus ticket when you shoved me out of this house. But now asterisk. You want to manage things? Mom's hands fluttered like frantic birds. Kala, darling, don't make this about the past. We were all younger then. You were older than me then, asterisk. I shot back. Old enough to know better. Old enough to lock the door behind your daughter because she didn't fit your mold. Sabrina's lips pressed into a thin line. We just want what's best for everyone. No, I said, my voice like broken glass. You want what's best for you. The clock ticked louder. Dad's nostrils flared. This is not how family behaves. No, I said again, softer this time. Family doesn't behave like this. Family doesn't throw you away and then come knocking when the scraps you left behind turn into a feast. For a moment, no one spoke. The room felt too small, too hot. I could see the calculations flicker behind Nathaniel's eyes. The numbers, the inheritance, the future he thought he'd cornered. I stood up. I have to go. Mom reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Where are you going? She asked, panic rising. We're not finished. We were finished the day you shut that door, I said. But you know what's funny? You didn't even bother to ask me the one question that really matters. Dad frowned. What's that? I smiled, bitter and bright. Whether I'd ever give you a penny, and I turned on my heel and walked out. My boots clicking on the stone path, the mud they were so worried about smearing behind me like a final defiant signature. But when I got to my car, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Because I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Back at my flat, I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and slumped to the floor. My phone buzzed on the table. A new message from an unknown number. Jock, alone. It was from Sabrina. My pulse thundered in my ears. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm inside me. She wanted to talk? Alone? About what? Another pitch? A threat? A bribe? I didn't know. But one thing was certain, the real game had just begun. I had no idea I was about to learn how far they'd go to drag me back. Or bury me for good. The message from Sabrina sat in my phone like a snake under my pillow. I read it again and again. We need to talk. Alone. A command, not a request. It made my skin itch. I didn't answer. Not immediately. I spent hours pacing my flat, my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring back like a ghost I didn't recognize. I tried to tell myself I didn't care what she wanted. I tried to believe I was untouchable. My bank accounts padded, my business thriving, my name carrying weight in boardrooms they'd never dare enter. But the truth was, old wounds itch when they start to heal. And Sabrina had clawed hers open just by finding me in the first place. By midnight, I'd convinced myself ignoring her would make it worse. I didn't trust her to let things lie. I didn't trust any of them. So I wrote back. One word. When? She replied within seconds. Tomorrow. Lunch. Park Cafe. 1 p.m. No kiss emoji. No fake warmth. Just business. Or blackmail. Or both. I barely slept. My mind raced through 100 scenarios. Sabrina crying crocodile tears about family unity. Sabrina offering me a deal too good to be true. Sabrina threatening to ruin me if I didn't play along. My thoughts curdled with memories I'd buried. The time Nathaniel poured my college fund into his failed restaurant venture. Mom telling the neighbors I'd run off to chase a man when I was really working 3 jobs. Dad selling my guitar for scrap when the mortgage came due. Pieces of me they'd chopped up for parts and never gave back. The morning was bright and cruel. The city hummed outside my window. Car horns, distant laughter, the click of heels on pavement. I showered twice, changed my outfit 3 times, settled on something sharp enough to cut through whatever game Sabrina thought she was playing. Black tailored trousers, white silk blouse, no jewelry except the slim gold watch I'd bought after closing my first 6-figure deal. I needed to look like I belonged to myself. I was early to the cafe, sat at a corner table with a direct line of sight to the door. I didn't order, didn't touch the complimentary water. When Sabrina arrived, she swept in like she owned the place. Hair immaculate, coat slung over her shoulders like a cape. She spotted me instantly, her smile thin and calculated. "Kala," she said, leaning in to kiss the air near my cheek. "So glad you could make it." I held my expression neutral. "You said you needed to talk, so talk." She sat opposite me, folding her hands on the table. The server hovered, but she waved him away. "No drinks, we won't be long." I waited. She studied me. eyes sharp, mouth twitching like she was chewing on the edges of her sentences. "Nathaniel doesn't know I'm here," she said finally. I arched an eyebrow. "Should he?" She ignored that. "I've been doing my research. About you, about your company, about how you built it, who you did it with." My fingers drummed on my knee under the table. "Is this supposed to scare me?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, darling, I'm just impressed. You built something extraordinary. But you made mistakes." "Everyone does." "Yes, but not everyone's mistakes are worth millions." She leaned forward, her perfume too sweet, suffocating. "I know about the non-compete breach 3 years ago, the one that could have sunk your consultancy if anyone had taken it to court. I know about the trademark dispute in Berlin. You settled under the table. I know about your silent partners, the ones you never declared in your early filings." My blood went cold. She was bluffing. She had to be. Those were skeletons buried deep. Things even my closest advisors didn't know. "What do you want, Sabrina?" She sat back, lacing her fingers. "I want a seat at your table. Nathaniel wants to take over, but he's an idiot. He doesn't have the vision. But I do. I see what you're doing. I see what it could be." I laughed. A short, bitter bark. "You think I'd let you anywhere near my company? After everything?" She didn't flinch. "I think you'll do whatever it takes to keep your skeletons in the closet. I don't want to destroy you, Kala. I want to build with you. We could be unstoppable together. By unstoppable, you mean you'd bleed me dry and toss my carcass to the tabloids when you're done." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Why would I do that? We're family." The word tasted rotten coming from her mouth. I stood up, knocking my chair back. Heads turned. I didn't care. "This conversation is over." Her eyes glittered. "Think carefully. If I can find this, so can others. Nathaniel already suspects. Dad's ready to sell your story to the highest bidder. Do you really want a war?" I leaned down so close she could smell my breath. "You don't know the first thing about war, Sabrina, but you're about to learn." I walked out into the crisp London afternoon, the wind slicing through my blouse. My phone buzzed again. This time a new number. "I can help you. They're planning more." "Trust me, no name, just that." I didn't recognize the number, but the sender's profile picture made my stomach drop. A photo of my parents' front porch, taken from the street. Recent. Fresh paint on the door. A threat? A warning? I couldn't tell. My pulse roared in my ears. Back at my flat, I locked every door, checked the windows twice, poured a double whiskey I didn't even taste. I sat on my couch, knees pulled to my chest, phone clutched in my sweaty palm. I could run. I could call my lawyer. I could fight. But first I needed to know, who else was watching me? And what exactly did they want? Because the more I stared at that porch photo, the more certain I became. My family hadn't just come for my money. They'd come for my life. And if I wanted to keep it, I'd have to drag every one of their secrets into the light before they buried mine in the dark. I had no idea whose side this mystery messenger was on, but they were right about one thing. This was only the beginning. The whiskey sat in my gut like a rock, while the porch photo burned holes into my brain. I must have stared at it for an hour, scrolling up and down through the same 5-word message. I can help you. Trust me. But trust was the one thing I'd learned to bury deep, especially when it came from shadows. I opened the contact info. No name. Just an international number bouncing through a VPN if I had to guess. A fake profile picture, except that the photo of my parents' porch was too fresh. The sun angle told me it was taken that morning. Someone had been there, watching them. Or me. My gut told me not to answer, but every instinct fighting for survival wanted to know who was holding the camera. So I typed, "Who are you?" 3 bubbles popped up almost immediately. "Nalo, friend. You're in danger. Meet me where'll..." My fingers hovered over the keys. Where? Another ping. Tonight, 10 p.m. Mill River Footbridge. Come alone. My skin crawled. Mill River was 20 minutes away, tucked behind a nature reserve I used to sneak off to as a teenager to get away from my parents' lectures. I knew that bridge. Old stone, always damp, the river below more swamp than stream. Isolated. Perfect for throwing someone in if they didn't like my answers. I could call the police. I could hire private security. But something told me this was bigger than a stalker with a camera phone. This felt like someone flipping the chessboard I didn't even know I'd been playing on. I didn't have time to think. I pulled on my coat, slipped my pocket knife into my boot, and walked out into the night. London's glow faded with every step toward the footbridge. By the time I reached Mill River, the streetlights had thinned out to broken pools of yellow. The trees creaked in the breeze, branches scraping against each other like old bones. My breath puffed out in clouds. I stopped at the mouth of the bridge. The stone arches looked older than time itself, moss gripping every crack. The river below gurgled. Dark. Hungry. Calla? The voice snapped through the shadows. Low, familiar. My pulse kicked. I turned slowly. At the far end of the bridge stood a figure. Hands jammed in a bomber jacket, hood pulled low. But I'd know that silhouette anywhere. Mason? He stepped forward, into the moonlight. Same storm-gray eyes, same crooked grin. Mason Carrick. My old co-founder. My first almost love. The one person who knew every mistake I'd made when my company was just a pipe dream, scribbled on beer-stained napkins. Long time, Calla, he said, voice soft. You look good. I swallowed the stone in my throat. What the hell are you doing here? You disappeared. You ghosted me, you left. He shrugged, glancing past me like he half expected a sniper dot to bloom on his forehead. I did what I had to. You're the one who made it big. But you made enemies too. I laughed, bitter. And you're here to save me? That's rich, Mason. You nearly tanked our startup with your half-baked pitch deck, and then you ran when the lawyers came sniffing. His jaw twitched. I know, I fucked up. But I didn't stay gone for nothing. I've been watching them, Calla. Your family, Sabrina, Nathaniel, your dad. They're not just trying to cash in on your net worth. They're trying to ruin you. Legally, financially, maybe worse. My stomach flipped. Why should I believe you? He reached into his jacket pocket. My hand flew to my boot, fingers grazing my knife, but he just pulled out a battered envelope and tossed it onto the stone rail between us. Because I have proof. I hesitated, then snatched it up. Inside were photocopies, bank statements, emails, old legal drafts. My eyes darted over the headers. Transactions in my name I'd never authorized. A signature that looked eerily like mine. Offshore accounts. A fake shell company tied back to my father's old golf buddy, the one who helped him manage his retirement savings. They're forging my signature? I hissed. Mason nodded. And they're spreading rumors, leaking bits to the press, telling anyone who'll listen that you launder money, that you used your client's cash to cover personal debts. If they get the right people to believe it, you'll be fighting lawsuits for the next 10 years. You won't have a penny left by the time you clear your name. The world tilted. I gripped the bridge rail so hard my fingers burned. Why are you helping me? I whispered. He met my eyes, and for a split second I saw the boy I used to dream about. The one who'd scribbled my name inside a heart on a Whitechapel pub wall. The one who'd sworn we'd build an empire together. Because I owe you, he said. And because you're the only one who can stop them now. A twig cracked in the darkness behind us. Mason spun, shoulders tensed. I shoved the envelope into my coat. What do we do? He grabbed my arm. We run. Tonight. We get to my place, lay low, and figure out our next move. You have to cut the head off this snake before it swallows you whole. I wanted to protest, but another branch snapped. Closer this time. A shadow moved in the trees. Come on, Mason hissed, tugging me down the side path that snaked away from the bridge. We ran, our footsteps crunching gravel, breath clouding the night. My mind spun with every step. My family, my money, my freedom. All hanging by a thread. As the river disappeared behind us, my phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another message. This time from Nathaniel. Where are you? We need to talk. I almost laughed. Too late, brother. Asterisk, I thought, as Mason pulled me deeper into the dark. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one, and I'd make damn sure they remembered the day they called me worthless. I was done running. Now, I was hunting. Mason's flat was a time capsule of our worst days and our best nights. He'd kept the same creaky loft above an old tailor shop, a relic from when we couldn't afford an office and scribbled million-pound ideas on scraps of butcher paper. The smell of burnt coffee and printer ink still clung to the walls, like ghosts too stubborn to leave. I sat at his battered kitchen table, the envelope of forged documents spread in front of me like a bomb waiting to detonate. Mason paced the narrow kitchen, phone glued to his ear, muttering to a contact in hushed tones. I tried not to listen, tried not to drown in the memories the place stirred up, how we'd once been partners, how we'd once been something more, until he vanished when I needed him most. When he hung up, he leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. We don't have long. If they know you met me, they'll double down. They've already doubled down, I snapped. My father's forging my name. Sabrina's threatening me with my own skeletons. Nathaniel. I trailed off. I didn't want to say it out loud. My big brother, the golden child, was in this up to his perfect hairline. If Mason's papers were real, and I was starting to believe they were, then Nathaniel was helping them dismantle me piece by piece. My stomach twisted. Mason pulled out a chair and straddled it backward. We need leverage. Something they can't bury. Something you control. I raised an eyebrow. Like what? A confession? You think Dad's gonna sit in front of a camera and say, "Sorry, world, I'm a fraud"? No. But people talk when they're desperate. And I know where your dad hides his secrets. I frowned. Where? He hesitated. His old golf club in Surrey. He's got an account there, under a shell name. That's where they wash the money. I scoffed. And you know this, how? He rubbed the back of his neck. I did work for him. After I left. Small jobs. I thought he was helping me get back on my feet. Turns out he was using me to launder bits of cash. I pieced it together too late. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to scream. So you're in this too? He winced. Not like them. I didn't forge your name. I didn't know they were setting you up. But yeah, I'm not clean, Calla. Neither are you. But you're the only one who can rip the whole thing open before they pin it all on you. The weight of it made my ribs ache. I stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the street below. Rain smeared the glass, distorting the orange glow of street lamps into ghostly halos. If I do this, I said, voice low, there's no going back. My family will never forgive me. Mason let out a dry laugh. Your family already chose their side. He was right. They'd made me an enemy long before I became a threat. So what's the plan? I asked. He drummed his fingers on the chair. We go to Surrey tomorrow. Break into the club's records, find the transfers, the fake accounts. We pull every string until the whole thing unravels. I barked out a laugh. Oh, sure. Let's just stroll into Dad's fancy country club with a flashlight. They'll roll out the red carpet. Mason's grin flashed. The grin I remembered from our night's brainstorming over cheap lager. We don't stroll in, we use an old friend. Remember Lorna? My eyes widened. Lorna Greaves, the bookkeeper who'd quit after Dad misplaced her pension fund. She'd always liked me. She'd hated Dad. She still works there? I asked. She's the manager now. And she's got an axe to grind. Trust me, she'll help. I wanted to believe him. Needed to. But a dull ache in my chest reminded me how trust had failed me before. I turned back to the table, gathered the papers, and slid them into my bag. Fine, we do it. But if this goes sideways, it won't. I gave him a sharp look. If this goes sideways, I take the fall alone. You stay clear. Not happening, he said. We started this together, we finish it together. I wanted to tell him we weren't the same kids in that pub anymore. But some part of me, the part that still remembered his hand on mine under the table, didn't want to say it. Not yet. We crashed for a few hours, Mason on the couch, me curled under a scratchy blanket on his floor. Sleep came in broken fits, my dreams a mess of Dad's accusing eyes and Sabrina's serpent smile. At dawn, we were on the road, Mason's beat-up hatchback rattling like a tin can down the motorway. Surrey's rolling hills rose to meet us, all manicured lawns and ancient oaks, a world away from the grime and neon of London. I felt like I was driving into a different life. Or maybe back to the life they'd tried to lock me out of. The golf club looked exactly how I remembered. White stucco walls, neat hedges, rich men with soft bellies and mean eyes. The guard at the gate barely glanced at Mason's car, just waved us through like we still belonged. Lorna met us in the staff lot. She looked older, but not softer. Her hair pinned back tight, her mouth drawn in a grim line. "Calla Whitlock," she said, voice clipped but warm. "Last I heard, you were halfway to Hollywood." I forced a smile. "Something like that." She eyed Mason, then turned back to me. "You here to blow it all up?" "Pretty much," Lorna sniffed. "Good. About damn time." She led us through the back corridors, the same hallways Dad used to stomp down, bellowing at caddies and underlings. My palms sweated every time I saw his face in the trophy photos lining the walls. In the back office, Lorna locked the door behind us. "They keep the offshore wires buried in the annual expense reports," she said, pulling out a battered file box. "Takes a keen eye to spot the fakes, but I've been skimming copies for years." She slapped a stack of folders on the desk. Mason and I dug in, page after page of forged invoices, doctored signatures, backdated transfers. Each discovery made my mouth drier. "This is enough to bury them," Mason said under his breath. I shook my head. "It's enough to make them desperate. They won't go down quiet." Lorna snorted. "Quiet? Your father's never done anything quiet in his life." I felt sick. The three of us hunched over those files, our heads almost touching, like conspirators. The girl they'd called worthless now the key to their ruin. When we finally surfaced, dusk was creeping in through the blinds. Mason packed the files into his bag, hands trembling just slightly. "We need to get this to someone who can't be bought," I said. Lorna cocked her head. "You got a name?" Mason looked at me. I nodded. "I've got someone. A reporter I trust. She's been after my dad for years. This will make her career." Lorna leaned back, arms folded, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Burn them down, Calla, and don't you dare flinch." Outside, as we headed for the car, my phone buzzed again. This time, no words. Just a photo. My front door. Kicked in. A single word below it. "Next." Oh. My blood turned to ice. Mason read it over my shoulder, his breath hot on my ear. "They know," he whispered. I clenched my fists. My family wasn't just playing defense anymore. They'd declared open war, and I was done being prey. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. We didn't go back to my flat that night. The photo of my door caved in made sure of that. Instead, Mason drove us to a chain motel off the M25, the kind with flickering neon signs and sticky carpets. We paid cash. Used fake names. I felt like a fugitive in my own city. Mason paced the small room while I sat cross-legged on the lumpy bed. The files we'd stolen from the club spread out around me like a shield. Every page was a landmine. Offshore accounts, false invoices, signatures that looked like mine but weren't. Proof of a conspiracy that could land my family in prison, or bury me if they got to the press first. "I still don't get it," I said, voice hoarse. "Why now? They've been stealing for years. Why come after me now?" Mason stopped pacing, ran a hand through his hair. "Because you made yourself too big to ignore. They can't control you, so they have to break you. Your father's old guard doesn't want you speaking out. Nathaniel's been spending money like it's Monopoly cash. And Sabrina's pushing him. If you pull out now, they lose everything." I let out a bitter laugh. "They always said I'd amount to nothing. Funny how nothing turned out to be worth millions." He sat on the bed next to me, careful not to touch the files. "Calla, we need to be smart. We drop this story too soon, they'll bury us in legal threats. We need a guarantee they can't wriggle out of." "A confession," I said. The word felt alien on my tongue. You want me to bait my own father into admitting he's been laundering money? Mason's mouth twisted into a crooked grin. You've always been good at pissing him off. Push the right buttons, he'll say too much. I shook my head. It's not enough. He'll say I forged the papers, that I'm unstable, that I'm trying to ruin the family out of spite. Mason reached into his bag and pulled out a tiny recorder, no bigger than a pen cap. Then let's make sure we catch everything. Every word, every lie. My chest tightened. The thought of facing my father made my stomach crawl. But there was no other way. If I wanted to cut the head off this snake, I had to look it in the eye. Fine, I said, but you're coming with me. Not this time. Mason's tone was gentle but firm. If he sees me, he'll clam up. You have to go alone. I stared at him, trying to read the lines in his face. Once I'd trusted that face with everything. Now I wasn't sure I could trust anyone. But the weight of the files in my lap reminded me I didn't have a choice. The next day was a blur of planning and rehearsing. Mason drilled me on what to say, which bait to dangle, which insults would get under Dad's skin. By the time night fell, my throat was raw from practicing my lines. When the hour came, I dressed like the daughter he remembered. Plain blazer, sensible flats, hair pulled back tight. No trace of the CEO they'd kicked out and tried to bury. We met at his golf club, Neutral Ground, or so he thought. I spotted him at the bar, swirling a whiskey like he'd never tasted defeat in his life. "Kala," he drawled when I sat down. "Didn't think you'd show." I forced a smile. "You wanted to talk. I'm listening." He leaned back, his eyes sharp as broken glass. "Sabrina tells me you've been snooping where you shouldn't, digging through old files, stirring up trouble." We didn't go back to my flat that night. The photo of my door caved in made sure of that. Instead, Mason drove us to a chain motel off the M25, the kind with flickering neon signs and sticky carpets. We paid cash, used fake names. I felt like a fugitive in my own city. Mason paced the small room while I sat cross-legged on the lumpy bed. The files we'd stolen from the club spread out around me like a shield. Every page was a landmine. Offshore accounts, false invoices, signatures that looked like mine but weren't. Proof of a conspiracy that could land my family in prison, or bury me if they got to the press first. "I still don't get it," I said, voice hoarse. "Why now? They've been stealing for years. Why come after me now?" Mason stopped pacing, ran a hand through his hair. "Because you made yourself too big to ignore. They can't control you, so they have to break you. Your father's old guard doesn't want you speaking out. Nathaniel's been spending money like it's Monopoly cash, and Sabrina's pushing him. If you pull out now, they lose everything." I let out a bitter laugh. They always said I'd amount to nothing. Funny how nothing turned out to be worth millions. He sat on the bed next to me, careful not to touch the files. "Kala, we need to be smart. We drop this story too soon, they'll bury us in legal threats. We need a guarantee they can't wriggle out of." "A confession," I said. The word felt alien on my tongue. "You want me to bait my own father into admitting he's been laundering money?" Mason's mouth twisted into a crooked grin. "You've always been good at pissing him off. Push the right buttons, he'll say too much." I shook my head. "It's not enough. He'll say I forged the papers, that I'm unstable, that I'm trying to ruin the family out of spite." Mason reached into his bag and pulled out a tiny recorder, no bigger than a pen cap. "Then let's make sure we catch everything. Every word. Every lie." My chest tightened. The thought of facing my father made my stomach crawl. But there was no other way. If I wanted to cut the head off this snake, I had to look it in the eye. "Fine," I said, "but you're coming with me." "Not this time." Mason's tone was gentle, but firm. "If he sees me, he'll clam up. You have to go alone." I stared at him, trying to read the lines in his face. Once I'd trusted that face with everything. Now I wasn't sure I could trust anyone, but the weight of the files in my lap reminded me I didn't have a choice. The next day was a blur of planning and rehearsing. Mason drilled me on what to say, which bait to dangle, which insults would get under Dad's skin. By the time night fell, my throat was raw from practicing my lines. When the hour came, I dressed like the daughter he remembered. Plain blazer, sensible flats, hair pulled back tight. No trace of the CEO they'd kicked out and tried to bury. We met at his golf club, neutral ground. Or so he thought. I spotted him at the bar, swirling a whiskey like he'd never tasted defeat in his life. "Kala," he drawled when I sat down. "Didn't think you'd show." I forced a smile. "You wanted to talk." "I'm listening." He leaned back, his eyes sharp as broken glass. "Sabrina tells me you've been snooping where you shouldn't, digging through old files, stirring up trouble." Sunlight filtered through the grime-caked window of the motel room like a lie pretending to be hope. I hadn't slept more than an hour. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face in the bar. That ugly twist of a smile, the certainty that he could ruin me with a flick of his wrist. Mason was already up, hunched over his laptop at the chip desk. A single lamp cast shadows across the files spread around him. He looked like a man stitching together a bomb. "Morning," he murmured when he saw me stirring. "I've been going through the recordings, pulling out the cleanest clips." I sat up, the thin blanket slipping off my shoulders. "How bad is it?" He shot me a look. "Bad for him, good for us. It's enough to get the right people sniffing around. But once we pull the pin, you know they'll try everything to spin it. They'll drag your name through the mud, say you forged it all." "They've done worse," I said. My voice was steady. Too steady, maybe. Like my body had gone numb to survive. Mason set his laptop aside and perched on the bed next to me. He smelled like stale coffee and determination. "Kala, we need to think 3 steps ahead. This isn't just about getting the story out. It's about surviving what happens next." I knew he was right. But hearing it made my chest tighten. I'd spent years burying the girl who'd once begged her father to love her. Now I was about to bury him, and the family that had thrown me out like garbage. "We meet your reporter at noon," Mason said. "Neutral ground. No leaks. She runs the story, you push it out from your channels too. Full transparency. Once it's public, they can't shut you up without making themselves look worse." I nodded. My mind was already racing ahead. "And when they push back?" His grin was sharp. "We push harder. We've got copies. Safe deposits. Friends in low places who owe me favors. If they come for you, they'll find out you're not alone." I almost smiled at that. Almost. Noon felt like it came in a heartbeat, and a century all at once. The cafe where we agreed to meet was small, tucked between an abandoned bookshop and a boarded-up bakery. I spotted her instantly. Penelope Ward, the reporter who'd been chasing my father's shady golf deals since I was a teenager. She looked exactly the same. Wild hair pinned back with a pencil, dark eyes that missed nothing. She raised an eyebrow when we sat down. "Kala Whitlock, back from the dead. And Mason Carrick. Last I heard, you two hated each other." "Desperate times," I said, sliding the envelope of files across the table. "We have enough here to blow open every shell company my father's been hiding. Offshores, fake transfers, forged signatures. Mine included." Penelope flipped through the first few pages, her lips twitching in that half-smirk I remembered so well. "You do know once I run this, you'll have a target on your back the size of the gherkin, right?" "I already do," I said. "Might as well own it." She glanced at Mason. "And you? Why now? You vanished when she needed you most." Mason's jaw flexed. "I was cleaning up my own mess. But this is bigger than my mistakes. They've got the city in their pocket. I owe Kala this." Penelope sat back, tapping her pen against the table. "Okay. I'll need a week to verify every piece. I'm not running with half a story. You know how fast they'll slap me with an injunction?" I leaned in. "You have 3 days. After that, we're dead in the water. They're already threatening me. My door's been kicked in. This is our shot." She studied me, her gaze searching for cracks. Whatever she saw, it must have been enough. She nodded once. 3 days. When we left the cafe, Mason squeezed my shoulder. "You did good in there." I shrugged him off. It's not done yet. He started to speak, but his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and his expression turned to stone. "What is it?" I asked. He showed me the message. A video. My building's lobby. My neighbor's door wide open, cops swarming the hallway. Yellow tape. And then, "My door again." Smashed. The words "traitor" spray-painted in red across it. I felt bile rise in my throat. They're sending a message. "Yeah," Mason said. "They're scared." But I knew better. Fear made my father dangerous. It made Nathaniel reckless. And Sabrina, God knew what she was capable of when her perfect life was threatened. Back at the motel, we doubled the locks and buried the files in the floorboards. Mason's idea. I sat on the bed, phone in hand, fingers hovering over my contact list. For years I'd avoided my old clients, my partners, even friends who'd asked too many questions. But if I was going to survive this, I needed them now. I called everyone. CEOs I'd built branding empires for. Developers I'd paid out of my own pocket when investors bailed. Designers who owed their first big break to the girl everyone called worthless. Some answered with cautious warmth. Others sounded scared. But by midnight, I had a small army. People willing to speak up. To sign statements saying I'd never laundered a penny for anyone but myself. Mason hung up another call and dropped next to me on the bed. "Your brother's been calling everyone he knows. He's spinning some story about you having a breakdown. Says you're trying to ruin the family out of spite." I snorted. Classic Nathaniel. Always the victim. Mason touched my knee. "They won't win, Kala. You've got the truth." I wished I could believe that. But truth didn't matter when you were up against people who'd rewrite it for breakfast. The knock on the door came at 2 a.m., 3 sharp raps. My heart stopped. Mason held a finger to his lips, crept to the peephole, and cursed under his breath. "What?" I whispered. "It's Sabrina." I almost laughed. A dry, unhinged sound that caught in my throat. "Let her in." Mason hesitated, then unlatched the door. Sabrina stood there in a trench coat. Her hair wet, mascara smudged. She looked less like my brother's fiancée and more like a ghost. "What the hell do you want?" I asked. She stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the stained carpet. "I'm not here to threaten you." Her voice trembled. "I'm here to make a deal." Mason crossed his arms. "We're not buying whatever you're selling, Sabrina." She shot him a glare, then turned back to me. "You don't understand. They're going to burn you to the ground, Kala. They're going to pin everything on you. The forgeries, the offshore accounts, the fake shells. They'll say you masterminded the whole thing." I clenched my fists. "I know." "No, you don't," she hissed. "You think you have proof. But so do they. Do you really think they didn't cover their tracks? They have recordings, fake documents, statements ready to go. If you push them, they'll push back harder. You'll spend the rest of your life fighting lawsuits." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why now?" She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw cracks in her polished veneer. Fear, regret, maybe even shame. "I loved Nathaniel," she said, her voice breaking, "but he's in too deep. He thinks he can save himself by throwing you under the bus. Your father's all in. If you go down, they keep everything. I can't watch them do that to you." "So what's your play?" Mason asked. "You want a cut of whatever's left when Kala burns them?" Sabrina shook her head. "I want out. I want protection. You leak the story, they'll come for me too. But I have copies. Emails, bank statements, stuff your dad never thought I'd find. I'll give it to you. All of it. In exchange, you get me out of the country. A new life." I stared at her, my mind a hurricane. Was this another trap? Another layer of manipulation? But something in her eyes told me it was real. Desperation had stripped her bare. "Deal," I said before I could second guess it. "But you give me everything tonight. If you're lying." "I'm not," she whispered. "They can't win. They don't get to win." We sat up until dawn. Sabrina hunched over my laptop, transferring files from her cloud storage. Emails from Nathaniel bragging about funneling cash into fake ventures. Texts between my father and his partners. Draft contracts with signatures half finished. Mason backed it up twice. 2 drives, 2 safe boxes, 2 escape routes. When the sun rose, Sabrina stood in the doorway, her bag at her feet. She looked like a woman stepping off the edge of a cliff. "Good luck, Kala," she said. "Burn them all." And she was gone. I looked at Mason, his face gaunt from exhaustion but alive with the same fire I felt in my own chest. "This is it," he said. "This is how we end them." For the first time in days, I believed him. I wasn't worthless. I was the match they'd never see coming. I was ready to set their whole empire on fire. I didn't sleep after Sabrina slipped out into the gray dawn. I sat at the motel's chipped table with Mason beside me, our shoulders brushing as we stared at the files she'd left us like a priest and penitent reading confessions before an execution. It was all there. Everything. The messages, the wire transfers, the fake shell companies registered in my name, the crooked signatures that looked so much like mine it made my skin crawl. She'd even found hidden voice memos Nathaniel recorded in the back office of the club. Him bragging about how easy it was to fix a document once the notary was paid off. My brother's voice dripped arrogance. Listening to it made me want to smash my phone against the wall. Mason scrolled through Sabrina's folders, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "She's got them nailed to the wall with this," he muttered. "Even your dad can't talk his way out of a recorded bank transfer trail." "He'll try," I said. My voice felt unfamiliar in my mouth. Quiet, razor thin. "He'll say it was me, that I forged everything to get back at them." Mason gave me that look, half exasperated, half awed, like he couldn't decide whether to hug me or shake me. "Kala, listen to me. This time, you're not alone. We've got evidence, we've got people ready to testify. And we've got Penelope. By the time your father's lawyers try to spin this, it'll be on every news channel from here to New York." "They'll come after her too," I said. "Penelope. She's been waiting for this for a decade," Mason said. "She knows the risk. She won't blink." We packed it all up. Every file, every recording, every scrap of damning proof. 2 duplicate sets. 2 backup drives hidden in the lining of my suitcase. Mason watched me as I sealed the bag shut with duct tape, my hands shaking so hard the tape kept catching on itself. "You okay?" he asked. I almost laughed. I wanted to tell him I was fine. That this was what I'd been building toward for years without even knowing it. That I'd grown a spine made of steel. But my heart was a lump in my throat. "No," I said honestly, "but it doesn't matter." We met Penelope again at a co-working space on the other side of town. Neutral ground. Too public for my father's pet lawyers or Nathaniel's hired muscle to do anything stupid. She took one look at the folders and gave a low whistle. "They're done," she said. Her voice was calm, but her fingers twitched around her pen. "Once this runs, they'll never recover. And you..." She looked at me, her eyes fierce. "They're going to paint you as the Judas, Kala. The ungrateful witch who stabbed her own family in the back." "Better the witch than the scapegoat," I said. She cracked a grin. "There she is. That's the girl I remember. Good, you're gonna need her." I signed a statement for her editor, swore I'd stand by every document. Recorded a video testimonial that would run with the exposé. My face, my voice, the truth coming from my lips before they could spin it otherwise. The camera felt like a scalpel on my skin. I wanted to curl into myself and disappear, but every word made the truth real. When it was done, Penelope squeezed my shoulder. "You did good. This story will break your father, Nathaniel. All of them." "It'll break me too," I said. She didn't argue. The next 48 hours moved like a fever dream. Mason and I holed up in a safe flat Penelope arranged, a cold, echoing apartment above a laundromat where the spin cycle rattled the walls every 20 minutes. We barely slept. Barely spoke. We watched the first headlines trickle out on our phones. Whitlock family fortune under fire, times CEO, daughter alleges fraud forgery. Sources close to the family deny claims. By the second day, my name was trending. My inbox was a war zone. Old friends begging for the inside scoop. Enemies sniffing for weakness. Lawyers demanding statements. Reporters camping outside my old flat. Mason stayed glued to the window, a half-empty whiskey bottle at his feet. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Too late to back out now," I said, My phone buzzed on the table. A single text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? This isn't over." No signature. But I knew who it was. Nathaniel. Or my father. Maybe both. I didn't reply. I just turned my phone over so I wouldn't have to see my own reflection in the cracked screen. That night, Mason and I sat on the floor of the safe flat, backs pressed against the cold wall. The world outside buzzed with my name, our story, the dirty secrets no one could bury anymore. "I never wanted this," I whispered. "I just wanted to be left alone. Build my own life." Mason rested his hand over mine. "You did. And look how much they hated you for it." I closed my eyes, felt the weight of every choice pressing on my chest. What if I lose everything? What if they tear me apart? "Then you stand back up," he said. "Like you always do." I wanted to believe him. But as the spin cycle rattled through the floorboards, I felt the storm outside the walls. The old voices creeping in. Worthless, ungrateful, trash. I clenched my jaw. No, not this time. They could say what they wanted. They could drag my name through the gutter. But they couldn't own me anymore. At dawn, the final headline dropped. Front page. Penelope's byline in bold. Heiress exposes family's multi-million-pound fraud. The photo was one she'd taken of me just before I'd signed the statement. My eyes were tired, my hair a mess, but my spine was straight. I looked like someone they'd underestimated for the last time. The phones never stopped. News vans crowded my old street. My father's lawyers issued threats by the hour. But for the first time, I felt calm, like the hurricane had moved on and left me standing in the wreckage. Mason threw his arm around my shoulders, his grin sharp enough to cut glass. "What now?" he asked. I stared at the headline, my name in black and white for the whole world to see. "Now," I said, my voice steady. "They get to feel what worthless really means." Outside, the sun crept through the grime. Not bright enough to burn everything clean, but enough to light the path I'd chosen. I'd spent my whole life begging for scraps from people who'd throw me away the second I didn't serve them. Now they'd get nothing from me. No forgiveness. No second chances. Only the truth, sharp as a blade, cutting through every lie they'd built. For the first time, I wasn't the one at the door begging to be let in. I was the one locking it behind me and throwing away the key. And when they came knocking, they'd find I wasn't the girl they'd kicked out anymore. I was the storm they'd never outrun. For the first week after the story broke, I felt like I was living in a parallel universe, one where my name was suddenly a headline instead of a punchline. But behind the headlines, the real war had only just begun. I watched my father's empire unravel in real time, one smug statement at a time. Nathaniel went on a charm offensive, all crocodile tears and fake apologies on morning shows. He painted himself as the quote, son caught in the middle of a vindictive sister's smear campaign. I nearly choked on my coffee watching him squeeze out tears for a camera when I'd seen him pour champagne on my old pillow the night they kicked me out. But the tide was turning. The bank documents, the recordings, Sabrina's files, they were all out in the open now. Every time my father tried to spin a new lie, Penelope dropped another nail in his coffin. By the end of the week, regulators had frozen 2 of his offshore accounts. The golf club was under audit, and Nathaniel's charity trust was suddenly the subject of a fraud investigation. But it wasn't enough. I could feel them regrouping behind the scenes. Old family friends started calling my contacts, whispering that I'd done this for revenge. I got anonymous texts at all hours. Threats, insults, disgusting photos I didn't want to think about. My voicemail filled up with poison, each message more desperate than the last. Mason handled most of it, blocking numbers, recording threats, making sure everything was backed up and stored in a safe deposit box. We didn't stay in one place for more than 2 nights. Every time we thought we'd found somewhere they couldn't reach, another coincidence happened. A car tailing us, a window cracked while we were gone, an envelope of shredded news clippings slipped under the door. I never told Mason how hard it was to keep my hands steady when I signed the papers for my lawyers, or how every headline made my chest ache with guilt. Not because they didn't deserve it, but because some dark part of me still wondered if I was what they said. Ungrateful. Vindictive. A traitor to my own blood. One night, after we'd changed motels for the 5th time in 2 weeks, Mason found me in the bathroom, curled up on the cold tile, phone clutched in my fist. Another message. This one just said, "You can't outrun blood." He knelt beside me, pried the phone from my hand. "They're losing, Kala. That's why they're doing this. Because they know they're finished. It doesn't feel like I'm winning, I said, my voice raw. That's because you're fighting fair, he said. But they don't know how to do that. And you're still here. That's how you win. The next morning, Penelope called. She sounded exhausted but triumphant. I've got something for you, she said. Meet me at the old ferry pier. Noon. We bundled up and headed out, sticking to back streets, watching every mirror for shadows. The pier was deserted except for the seagulls wheeling overhead. Penelope waited near the rusted railing, a battered briefcase in hand. Your father's lawyer secretary came to me, she said without preamble. She's been hiding copies of the original contracts for years. Turns out she's been blackmailing him for hush money, but now that the story's out, she wants protection. She handed me the folder. Inside were handwritten memos, old expense ledgers, proof of how deep the fraud ran. It tied up every loose end we had left. Mason let out a low whistle. This is it. This will kill him politically. No more denials. Penelope nodded. And it'll buy you some leverage if they try to drag you to court. No judge will touch him now. I clutched the folder to my chest. The wind off the water stung my eyes. I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Or maybe both. Penelope touched my shoulder. What you did. It cost you. But it'll save a lot more people than you know. ... I knew she meant it. But in that moment, all I could think was, I was the one who'd paid. I'd lost my home. My name was now a brand soaked in scandal. And the only people I'd ever called family were monsters with my face in their crosshairs. They'll never stop, I said. Even after this, they'll wait. They'll find some new angle. Mason stepped up beside me. Then we stay ahead. You built an empire once, Kala. Now you build it again, with people who don't want to own you. That night, back at the motel, we sat in the silence of the flickering neon sign. Mason cracked open a bottle of cheap wine and raised it in a mock toast. To Calla Whitlock, not worthless, not disposable, the woman who dragged the devil into the daylight. I clinked my plastic cup against his. The wine was terrible, but it burned all the way down in a way that felt like truth. I didn't sleep much after that. I spent hours on my laptop drafting new contracts, reaching out to old clients, rebuilding the bones of my consultancy from the ashes. Every email was a tiny act of defiance. Every yes I got back was proof I wasn't who they said I was, but I wasn't stupid. I knew my father would come back for me if he could. I knew Nathaniel would keep spinning lies as long as there was someone willing to listen. And I knew Sabrina, wherever she was now, was still out there, her own brand of chaos waiting to find me again. Mason lay sprawled on the second bed, snoring lightly. I looked at him, at the man who'd betrayed me once and come back to stand at my side when it mattered most. Maybe it didn't fix everything, but it mattered. It made the air feel less heavy. At dawn, I stepped outside into the icy street, the folder Penelope gave me tucked under my arm. The city hummed awake around me. Buses grumbling, streetlights flickering off, the smell of burnt coffee drifting through the air. I felt it then. The smallest spark of something I hadn't let myself believe I still had. Hope. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe lawsuits. Maybe headlines calling me a snake, a traitor, a witch. Maybe a new contract with a client who didn't care about my last name. But for the first time since they threw me out onto that wet driveway, I felt like I owned my life again. They'd kicked me out for being worthless. But they'd never understood that you can't lose what you never owed them in the first place. When they came back for what I'd built, they found something they could never steal. Me. And that was enough. One by one, the headlines would fade. The bank accounts would close. Nathaniel's crocodile tears would dry up. And I'd still be here, standing in the ruin of everything they'd tried to control, building something new with my own two hands. No more begging to be loved. No more doors slammed in my face. No more family who'd sell me for a profit. Only me, the storm they'd never see coming again. I walked back into the motel, folder clutched tight, ready for the next war. I'd survived worse. And I wasn't done yet. ... I knew she meant it. But in that moment, all I could think was, I was the one who'd paid. I'd lost my home. My name was now a brand soaked in scandal. And the only people I'd ever called family were monsters with my face in their crosshairs. They'll never stop, I said. Even after this, they'll wait. They'll find some new angle. Mason stepped up beside me. then we stay ahead. You built an empire once, Kala. Now you build it again, with people who don't want to own you. That night, back at the motel, we sat in the silence of the flickering neon sign. Mason cracked open a bottle of cheap wine and raised it in a mock toast. To Kala Whitlock. Not worthless, not disposable, the woman who dragged the devil into the daylight. I clinked my plastic cup against his. The wine was terrible, but it burned all the way down in a way that felt like truth. I didn't sleep much after that. I spent hours on my laptop drafting new contracts, reaching out to old clients, rebuilding the bones of my consultancy from the ashes. Every email was a tiny act of defiance. Every yes I got back was proof I wasn't who they said I was. But I wasn't stupid. I knew my father would come back for me if he could. I knew Nathaniel would keep spinning lies as long as there was someone willing to listen. And I knew Sabrina, wherever she was now, was still out there, her own brand of chaos waiting to find me again. Mason lay sprawled on the second bed, snoring lightly. I looked at him, at the man who'd betrayed me once and come back to stand at my side when it mattered most. Maybe it didn't fix everything, but it mattered. It made the air feel less heavy. At dawn, I stepped outside into the icy street, the folder Penelope gave me tucked under my arm. The city hummed awake around me, buses grumbling, streetlights flickering off, the smell of burnt coffee drifting through the air. I felt it then, the smallest spark of something I hadn't let myself believe I still had. Hope. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe lawsuits. Maybe headlines calling me a snake, a traitor, a witch. Maybe a new contract with a client who didn't care about my last name. But for the first time since they threw me out onto that wet driveway, I felt like I owned my life again. They'd kicked me out for being worthless. But they'd never understood that you can't lose what you never owed them in the first place. When they came back for what I'd built, they found something they could never steal. Me, and that was enough. One by one, the headlines would fade. The bank accounts would close. Nathaniel's crocodile tears would dry up. And I'd still be here, standing in the ruin of everything they'd tried to control, building something new with my own two hands. No more begging to be loved. No more doors slammed in my face. No more family who'd sell me for a profit. Only me. The storm they'd never see coming again. I walked back into the motel, folder clutched tight, ready for the next war. I had survived worse, and I wasn't done yet. I thought the worst storms had passed, that after the headlines, the court filings, and the humiliations, I'd find some kind of peace in the ashes. But the thing about tearing down an empire built on secrets is that the rubble has a way of shifting in the night, just when you think it's safe to stand on it. A week after Penelope's final exposé, I rented a short-term flat on the edge of the city, a place with big windows, bare walls, and no ghosts in the closet. Or so I told myself. Mason moved in for a while, crashing on the lumpy sofa with his battered laptop always humming in the background. I pretended it didn't matter. Pretended I didn't jump every time a car slowed in front of the building, or a knock came at the door after dark. The day I signed the papers for my new office space, I got a letter slipped under my door. No postage, no return address. Just my name in my father's handwriting, neat and practiced, like he was still grading my homework. Kala, asterisk, it began. Congratulations on your little show. You've made your point. Now, enough. There's still a seat for you here, if you know how to keep your mouth shut. No signature. Just an address. The house I hadn't seen since the day they threw me out. A line I'd sworn I'd never cross again. Mason read the letter over my shoulder, his breath warm on my neck. It's bait, he said. He wants you back under his thumb. You go there, you walk into a trap. I know, I said. But my voice cracked. Because some traitorous part of me wanted to see him one last time. To stand in that hallway where I'd once begged him not to lock me out. To look him in the eye and say, I won. Mason crossed his arms, watching me pace the kitchen. You're not going alone. I barked a laugh. He'll never let you pass the gate. He won't talk if you're there. Then I'll be outside, he said, but you're not walking in blind. He pressed a tiny earpiece into my palm, a relic from our early hustle days, when we used to pitch to clients who thought we were too green to handle real money. It felt like slipping back into the girl I used to be. All sharp edges and hidden weapons. When I pulled up to the house, my throat tightened. The same hedges trimmed within an inch of their lives. The same cracked stone walkway. The same brass door knocker that had slammed shut behind me when I was 19. I knocked once. The door swung open like they'd been waiting for me all along. My father sat in the sunroom, hands folded over a glass of scotch. He looked older, but not smaller. Power clung to him like a bad smell. "Kala," he said, "sit." I didn't. I stood just inside the doorway, the scent of polished wood and expensive candles turning my stomach. "What do you want?" I asked. He tilted his glass, watching the amber swirl. "I want you to come home." I barked a laugh that tasted like bile. "You don't have a home left. I burned it down, remember?" His eyes snapped up, cold and sharp. "You think you've won? All you did was pull the curtains back. You think the people who matter will turn on me over some headlines? They don't care where the money comes from, just that it keeps flowing." "Then why am I here?" I snapped. "Why the letter? Why now?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because you're still my daughter. Because no matter how high you climb, you'll always be a Whitlock, and I can fix this. I can make it all go away. No more lawsuits, no more reporters sniffing around. Just sign a few papers, say you lied, take the blame for the parts that matter least. I'll protect you. You'll have your seat back at the table." I felt the laugh bubble up, sharp and mean. "So I take the fall for you, again. And in return, you let me sit at the kids' table while you and Nathaniel carve up what's left." He stood. The sudden movement made me flinch, but I held my ground. "This is your last chance, Kala. Family is everything. Without us, you're nothing. They'll eat you alive out there. You'll come crawling back." My hands curled into fists. The earpiece buzzed faintly. Mason's voice, a calm hum in my ear. "Stay cool. Get what you need." I stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes. Lines I'd once traced with chubby fingers when I thought he was my hero. "You taught me something valuable," I said, my voice steady. "You taught me that family isn't who shares your blood. It's who stands beside you when you have nothing left. And that's not you, not Nathaniel, not anyone in this house." His mouth curled. "You think your pet reporter will keep you safe? You think that boy you run around with can protect you when the real wolves come?" I leaned in, close enough that he could feel my breath. "I don't need protection. I need you to understand something. You can't bury me anymore. You can't throw me away. You can't even touch me." He sneered. "You think you're untouchable?" "No," I said. "I think I'm free." I turned on my heel, the earpiece humming with Mason's relief. I walked out through the foyer, past the hallway where I had once stood with my suitcases and my heart in my throat, past the family portraits that no longer meant anything. Outside, Mason was leaning against the car, eyes scanning the hedges for shadows. When he saw me, he pushed off the hood and caught me by the shoulders. "You okay?" I nodded, my throat raw. "I am now." He held my gaze, searching for cracks. "You're sure?" I let out a shaky laugh. "I'm sure." In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. My father tried to salvage what was left of his public image, but the investigations kept crawling through every lie. Nathaniel's crocodile tears dried up when his name hit the fraud registry. Even the golf club, the shrine to his ego, shut its doors when the accounts froze. And me? I rebuilt, one piece at a time. My consultancy doubled its client base in 2 months. The same people who'd once looked at me like a charity case were now calling at all hours, begging for my strategy to fix their reputations. But I didn't say yes to everyone. I picked my people. The ones who'd stood beside me when the headlines turned nasty. The ones who'd believed I wasn't worthless when my own family said I was. One night, Mason and I sat on the rooftop of my new office. A real one this time, not some attic flat with mold creeping up the walls. The city spread out below us, glittering like 1,000 tiny promises I'd made to myself. "You ever regret it?" he asked, passing me a bottle of cheap cider like we were back in our 20s. I thought about it. About the scars still raw and the whispers that still came when I walked into certain rooms. About the nights I woke up thinking I heard my father's voice outside my door. I shook my head. "No, I regret not doing it sooner." He chuckled. "They'll keep coming, you know. Nathaniel, the old guard. They'll find new ways to get under your skin." I sipped the cider, the bubbles stinging my tongue. "Let them try. They kicked me out thinking they'd buried me. Turns out, they planted something they couldn't kill." Mason leaned back, watching the clouds drift across the London sky. What now then? I smiled. A real one this time, no bitterness left behind my teeth. Now, I build something bigger, something they can't touch. And when they try, I'll remind them I've already survived their worst. He laughed, clinking his bottle against mine. To Calla Whitlock, worthless no more. I raised my bottle high, the city humming below like a promise kept. They'd tried to throw me away, but they'd forgotten one simple truth. You don't get to decide who's worthless. You don't get to bury someone who knows how to rise. And when they come knocking again, because I know they will, they'll find a locked door and a girl who learned to build her own kingdom from the ashes. This time, I'll answer. And they'll wish I hadn't. I thought exposing my father's empire would be the end of the fight, but the truth is, wars like these don't really end. They just shift shape, trading threats in dark alleys for whispers in boardrooms and backrooms I used to think I'd never see. By the time winter settled over the city, my name was more than a scandal headline. It was currency, sharpened by every lie my family tried to spin, polished by every deal I closed on my own terms. But power, I learned, is a dangerous thing when you've stolen it from people who think they're entitled to it by blood. One cold Friday, I sat across from Penelope in a corner booth at a cafe. Only real reporters still remembered. The place she'd brought me to the night the first story broke. She looked older, her hair streaked with more gray, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. Your brother's lawyer reached out to me, she said, nursing her third espresso. He's pushing a countersuit, claims you fabricated the recordings and bribed Sabrina to lie. I didn't flinch. Let him push it. Every time he opens his mouth, I get 5 new clients who know I'd never sell them out like he did me. She tilted her head, watching me. You really think it's over? I looked out the window, where the city blurred into fog and brake lights. It'll never be over, Penny. Not for them, not for me. But at least now I'm fighting on ground I built with my own hands. She smiled, slow and proud. I like this version of you. Not the girl who sat in my office 3 years ago, asking if the world would believe her. The woman who stopped caring if they did. I laughed. It came out rough but real. That girl's gone. Later that night, Mason and I sat in my new office. A glass-walled floor high enough above the city that the traffic looked like a glittering river. He sprawled across the plush guest sofa, his laptop balanced on his knees, an empty pizza box perched dangerously close to his elbow. Nathaniel's running out of friends, he said, scrolling through a batch of news clips. One of Dad's old golf buddies just testified. Says Nathaniel paid him to keep quiet about the fake shell accounts. I leaned against the window, the skyline reflected in the glass like a crown I'd built for myself. Good. The more they talk, the less they can spin. And Sabrina? He asked. Heard from her? I shook my head. Somewhere in the world, Sabrina was sipping cocktails under an assumed name, cashing in the deal she'd made when she slipped her blackmail files into my bag. Some nights I hated her for that, for saving herself when she'd helped break me. But mostly, I pitied her, because no matter where she ran, she'd still be one of them inside. I turned back to Mason. What about us? I asked. The question slipped out before I could swallow it. We'd spent so long shoulder to shoulder, breathing each other's fear and fury. But the war was winding down now. And when the smoke cleared, who would we be? He looked at me over his laptop, eyes soft but wary. Us? This, I said, waving at the mess. The pizza crusts, the safe files still locked in the floorboards, the half-finished bottle of cheap scotch we drank like a ritual whenever we won another round. Do we keep doing this, or do we learn how to be normal again? He snorted. Normal's overrated. But I saw the truth in his smile. He was tired. We both were. And maybe, just maybe, we deserved to stop surviving and start living. By spring, the countersuit evaporated under the weight of Penelope's reporting and my father's crumbling alliances. Nathaniel vanished for a while. Rumors swirled about him trying to spin up some new venture in Dubai, or hiding out in a villa paid for with money he'd promised the taxman he didn't have. The day the final settlement came through, I stood in a courthouse lobby that smelled like old varnish and fresh betrayal. My father wasn't there. He'd sent his lawyers, a pack of suits who looked at me like I was a bug they couldn't squash without getting their shoes dirty. They handed me the final terms, a formal disownment, an NDA I refused to sign, and a payout so laughable I wanted to frame it on my office wall. I signed with a pen I'd borrowed from Mason, its cap chewed nearly in half from our late-night strategy sessions. When the last page was done, I left the courthouse without looking back. Outside, Mason waited on the steps, a takeaway coffee in each hand. He held one out to me. "How's it feel?" I took the cup, its warmth seeping into my cold fingers. "Final." He raised an eyebrow. "Final good or final terrifying?" "Both," I said, "but mostly good." We walked through the city until my feet ached, stopping every few blocks to breathe in the place I'd made mine again. Not the polished streets where my father's cronies used to nod at me like I was baggage to drag along for show, but the side roads and tucked-away cafes where my clients were now friends, and my name was mine alone. When we got back to my flat, I found a single envelope waiting on the doormat. No stamp, no name, just a slip of paper inside, scrawled in my brother's crooked hand. "Next time, you won't see us coming." Mason read it over my shoulder, then tore it in half. "Let them come," he said. "We're ready." But I wasn't so sure. Some nights I still woke with my heart hammering against my ribs, a phantom knock at the door echoing in my ears. Some wounds don't close just because you stitched up the skin. But every morning, I stood up, poured my coffee, signed a new contract, built another piece of the life they'd sworn I'd never have. One day I knew the phone would ring again. Another threat. Another lawyer. Maybe Nathaniel himself, trying to spin his next scheme. And when it happened, I'd let it ring. Because I'd learned something they never understood. You don't win by fighting the same war forever. You win by living like they can't touch you. By refusing to hide in the shadows they made for you. By standing in your own light. So when Mason asked me, later that night, what I wanted to do with all the files still locked away, the copies of every lie, every forged contract, every whispered threat, I told him the truth. "We keep them," I said, "but not because we're scared. Because sometimes, you need to remember what it costs to be free." He nodded. No toast this time. No cheap whiskey to dull the edges. Just us. The city humming beneath our feet. And the promise that whatever came next, we'd face it the same way we'd faced everything else. Together. Because family isn't the people who kick you out when you're down. It's the ones who stand guard at your door when the past tries to break it down again. And for the first time in my life, I had one worth fighting for. The last time I stood on my parents' doorstep, I was a girl with my life stuffed into 2 cheap suitcases and a heart full of hope they'd open the door again. I didn't know that sometimes the door you're pounding on needs to stay shut forever. Years later, I watched that same door fade into the distance through the back window of a black cab. The driver didn't ask why my hand shook when I said the address. He just drove. London's lights blurring like a city that had decided it didn't owe me any more ghosts. When I got back to my flat, Mason was there, a pot of stale coffee already brewing, his eyes bloodshot but steady. The files were still stacked in the corner, each one a grave marker for the lies that used to keep me small. He didn't ask what my father had said. He didn't have to. Some silences don't need to be broken. That night we stayed up until dawn, sorting every piece of evidence for the final time. It felt like an autopsy, cutting open the rotten truth to remind myself it was real, that I wasn't the villain they'd painted on tabloids and talk shows. The settlement payments started to trickle in. Not hush money. I'd rejected that offer so many times my lawyer stopped asking, but restitution. Penalties for the forgeries. The fraudulent transfers in my name. The shell accounts they'd tried to bury in my tax returns. It wasn't enough to buy back the years they stole, but it was enough to pay my people, the ones who'd stood beside me when I was radioactive, to anyone who still cared about the Whitlock name. Penelope's final feature dropped on a Sunday morning. The photo was of me standing in the lobby of my new building, the glass and steel monument I'd raised like a middle finger to every door they'd slammed in my face. The headline was sharp, but honest. She built herself, the heiress who refused to stay quiet. Asterisk. I spent that afternoon alone. No calls, no Mason, no reporters. Just me and a battered notebook I'd found in the bottom of my old duffel. The one I'd carried the night they kicked me out. The pages were full of sketches for a company I'd dreamed up while sleeping on friends' couches, scribbled at 2 a.m. under street lamps while I waited for a bus that never came. I pressed my palm to that first page. The ink faded, but the promise still alive. One day, they'll wish they hadn't let me go. Funny how some wishes come true for the wrong people. When Mason came back that night, he found me curled up on the sofa, the notebook open on my lap. "Reminiscing?" he asked, settling beside me. I shrugged, reminding myself. Of what? I closed the notebook, my thumb brushing the bent corner of the cover. That they didn't make me, they just gave me the shove I needed. He nodded, pulling me close. You did it, Kala. It's done. But he knew, like I did, that it would never be done. Because people like my father, like Nathaniel, like the cronies who'd once called me worthless, they don't go quietly. They circle back when the spotlight dims, when they think you're soft enough to crack open again. But they'd miscalculated something crucial. I wasn't a girl banging on a locked door anymore. I was the one holding the key to every room I ever wanted to build. And I'd learned you can't get thrown out of a kingdom you own from the foundation up. I spent the next months rebranding my firm, shifting every scrap of what I'd built into something new. Something that couldn't be touched by the old name they'd tried to tether me to. Clients poured in faster than I could hire staff. I watched the same executives who'd once ignored my emails line up to buy a slice of my strategy. The same strategy they'd laughed at when I pitched it from a cafe table with borrowed Wi-Fi. And I never forgot the people who'd stayed when the roof fell in. I gave my first big bonus to the freelance designer who'd worked for scraps in my basement office. I hired the lawyer who'd sent me a single encouraging text when the headlines turned on me. I even found the landlord who'd turned a blind eye when I couldn't make rent and paid off the rest of her mortgage. Small repayment for big faith. By autumn, the city felt different. Not softer, but sharper in a way that didn't cut me anymore. Mason and I walked through it one evening after another client dinner. No bodyguards, no burner phones, no safe houses. Just us and the low hum of traffic. The glow of shop windows that reminded me how the world kept spinning no matter who tried to stop it. You ever think you'd get here? He asked, nudging my shoulder. No, I said honestly. But I think the girl I used to be would be proud. He grinned, sliding his arm around my waist. The girl you used to be would kick your ass for saying that out loud. I laughed, loud enough that the couple passing us turned to stare. For once, I didn't care. Let them stare. When we got back to the office, I found a letter waiting on my desk. No envelope. Just a sheet of paper folded into crisp quarters. My name scrawled across the front in Nathaniel's messy script. I unfolded it with steady hands. You'll never be rid of us, asterisk it said. Blood doesn't wash away. Mason read it over my shoulder, his breath hot against my ear. Want me to track him down? I shook my head. No need. Because here's what my brother never understood. I wasn't trying to wash them away. I was building something bigger, something too wide for their poison to reach. Blood might not wash away, but it can't drown you if you learn how to swim. And I'd done more than swim. I'd learned to sail my own storm. The next day, I signed the final paperwork to expand my consultancy into 3 new countries, offices in Amsterdam, Chicago, Sydney, each one staffed by people who knew the cost of loyalty and the price of betrayal, people who'd never call me worthless again. That night, I stood on the balcony of my new office tower, the city sprawling out below me, its lights flickering like a promise I'd made to myself long before my family ever called me a disappointment. They could keep their blood ties. I had my own, forged in boardrooms and basement flats, in cracked mugs of coffee and panicked phone calls at 2 a.m, stronger than anything we shared by DNA. I stayed there until the wind whipped my hair into knots, until my eyes watered from the cold, until I could almost hear my old self whisper, "They'll never break you again." I turned and walked inside, closing the balcony door behind me. Tomorrow they might come knocking with new threats, new lawyers, new headlines, and tomorrow I'd open the door, look them dead in the eye, and remind them they were the ones who taught me exactly how to win this game. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.